Hi, I'm Sally, here to talk about my experience hiking the tour of the Lake District. So what is the tour of the Lake District? It's just a route that the folks at Cicerone Press came up with, and it's designed to take in sort of all of the highlights and give you a really comprehensive experience of the Lake District in England. I did the trail in 8 full days plus 2 sort of half days on either end. That's not including one rest day. I took a few days in. I would not recommend doing it any faster than that because I found it quite tiring at that pace. There is a surprising amount of vertical on this route. You may think that, there's no big mountains there, how bad can it be? But it's surprising how much it adds up. And something that I found really difficult was that instead of hiking upwards all morning and then downwards all afternoon, like you often do, say, in the Alps or in the Rockies, the topography of the trail often looks sort of like this. And it can be pretty demoralizing when you've spent all morning hiking up and then down to have your lunch and then realize that you have to do it all over again. I think it's a bit more tiring actually than the trails where you're just gaining elevation for half the day and then you get to enjoy going downhill all afternoon. I did take a rest day unexpectedly early because I was that tired after a few days, also jet lagged, and I'd come straight from a wedding, so that probably didn't help. I believe I only took one of the high route options outlined in the guidebook. I believe there are 4 or 5 of those high route options. I'll just post my Strava data on here so that you can get a sense of how far I was walking every day and the elevation. There are quite a few villages and sort of farms and settlements. This is not wilderness. This isn't wild and rugged. Maybe compared to some other parts in England it is, but this is not a wilderness experience. This is also like a cultural and historical experience, and the landscape is really beautiful. It's just different than a wilderness landscape. There are some parts that do feel more remote, but you're never really that far away from civilization, which is great for solo hikers. I felt totally safe on this route, even though the weather was a bit sketchy. And I always felt like, if I needed shelter or food or something, that it wasn't going to be that far away. And in fact, I was able to eat at some really great cafes and restaurants along the way, which is wonderful, pubs. I was able to stop and buy a few provisions here and there, and I was able to eat some really great English breakfasts, which is my favorite thing about hiking in England. So I did the route in mid-July, and the weather it never got cold, but it was windy and it rained a lot. Out of the 10 total days that I was walking, I believe it rained for 8 or 9 of them. It is pretty rainy in the Lake District, not surprisingly. Although there can be periods of a couple of weeks where the weather's really good. I just happened to arrive in between some of those more sunny periods. So something that's a bit unique about the Lake District is it's the one place where you are allowed to wild camp in England. And technically speaking, it is illegal, but the park administration does sort of tacitly allow people to do that as long as they're respectful and leave no trace. As a Canadian, I usually love to stay indoors when I'm hiking in Europe because that's such a novelty. But I was on a really long trip and was looking for opportunities to save a few bucks. So I decided to do this route with my backpacking gear and camp along the way. Now, I was excited to do a couple of nights at least of wild camping. However, the weather was so terrible that I ended up just camping at hostels and commercial campgrounds along the way instead. And there are quite a number of those. It can get a bit windy and stormy as well. That was the reason my first night of wild camping was canceled. There was a huge storm and I didn't want to be up in an exposed area, and also I was worried about lightning because a lot of the places where you're actually able to wild camp are up pretty high and there's no trees up there. It's very exposed to the elements, so keep that in mind. But fortunately, I was actually able quite easily to find places to stay or to camp at the last minute, including one night that I spent indoors in Keswick, where there's a hiker hostel. I was very lucky to get the last bed on a night when there was sort of monsoon-like rains all night. I was so happy to be able to stay inside that night. I was also able to grab campsites at the last minute in a couple of places, but don't count on it. There are a few places that are really busy, and I was glad that I had reservations beforehand. So something I really appreciate about camping at the YHA hostels, that's Youth Hosteling Association hostels, is that you're able to use the indoor amenities if you camp at those hostels. So that means a kitchen, a lounge space, they have a great breakfast, the showers and bathrooms, there's usually a drying room, laundry. These are amazing amenities when you are camping in the Lake District because it does rain a lot and your gear will be wet and you will be wet, and you will want somewhere that you can hang out in the evenings over breakfast where you have a roof over your head. So I really do recommend taking advantage of those campgrounds along the way. There's also some campgrounds that don't have those kinds of indoor amenities, but often have showers, indoor bathrooms, laundry. You can maybe pay to charge your phone. And then there's one inn where you can camp on their property, and you can eat, of course, at their pub. Now, would I recommend doing this route and camping along the way? No, I actually kind of regret doing it that way. I wish I had just ponied up the extra money and stayed indoors, because I just would have had a much more pleasant time being able to stay dry at night and not having to carry all of my camping equipment. You might be wondering, how busy is this trail? So this trail is not, again, it's not a wilderness experience. You're going to be walking through some towns, some little settlements. You're going to be walking near the road once in a while or on old farm roads. There are other people out day hiking or walking their dogs, and there is one or two sections that overlap with really popular day hikes. But for the most part, it did not feel at all crowded. I would often go hours without seeing anyone on some of the more remote, less popular sections. And I did have some wonderful sort of moments of solitude, drinking in some great views. I took a rest day at Fisher Ground, which had a nice quiet campground, hardly anybody there. And there was a narrow gauge historical train that I was able to spend my rest day riding around on, and I really recommend stopping there and partaking in that train ride because it's a lot of fun. It's really cute. So the route is not marked at all, and there are so many roads and trails and things in the Lake District that you're going to want to make sure that you have either a map with the route marked, or the Cicerone book, which will have a map as well and instructions, or have a GPS track on your phone, preferably more than one of those options. Even so, I did manage to get lost once in a very frustrating, overgrown field where I was trapped for like half an hour. So you're gonna have to look at that map a lot to stay on track. Make sure that whatever you have, you're able to use in the pouring rain. I did not bring rain pants because it was not cold. So I really don't think that's necessary, but do bring a really good rain jacket and make sure that all of your gear is wrapped in at least one layer of impenetrable plastic. I do have a hot tip on my gear channel about how to protect your gear inside your bag. It worked really well in the Lake District. The only thing that I did not keep in a plastic bag was my waterproof matches, and that's actually the reason I couldn't wild camp on the second night that I intended to, because I got out my waterproof matches and they crumbled in my hands because they were that wet. So really make sure every single thing is bundled up in plastic. So if you are camping and you're arriving in Ambleside, you can buy fuel there in Ambleside. You should be able to buy fuel as well in Keswick. It's a real sort of outdoorsy capital of the Lake District, and you can buy all sorts of gear there. If I were to do this trip again, I would definitely reconsider camping and instead plan to stay indoors. Although logistically that might be a little bit trickier because there might be a couple of places where there might not be indoor accommodation right along the route. I would also plan to spend more days on the trail. I would definitely plan to do maybe either shorter days or plan for, say, 2 or even 3 rest days. In particular, I wish that I'd spent a rest day in Keswick. There's a pencil museum there that I really wanted to go to. Because this is a pretty physically demanding trip, especially if you're loaded down with gear like I was. Now, if you're staying indoors, you wouldn't have to bring so much gear, so maybe you could move a little bit faster. Would I recommend the tour of the Lake District? Yes, if you're in good shape and you are tolerant of rainy weather, absolutely. It was challenging, both physically and because of the weather, but it was also so beautiful and so memorable. I've hiked many places in England and enjoyed all of them. This was no exception. Definitely 100% would recommend it. So I guess go by the guidebook because that's the only way you're going to find the route, and have fun.